When the temperature first dropped below zero, everyone on the street assumed Elias would finally give up. Moving trucks came and went. Houses were boarded up for winter. But Elias stayed. Instead of packing boxes, he picked up a shovel. Day after day, he dug into the frozen ground behind his small, aging house. Neighbors whispered, laughed, and shook their heads. Some said grief had finally gotten to him. Others said loneliness had made him lose his mind. Elias never explained himself. He just kept digging. The hole grew deeper, then longer. It wasn't just a pit anymore, it was a tunnel. Kids biked past to peek through the fence. One neighbor called the city to complain about unsafe behavior. Another joked that Elias was building his own grave. At night, lights glowed faintly from underground. No one knew what he was doing down there, and that mystery made people uncomfortable. In a town where winter already felt like an enemy, Elias had chosen to go beneath it. December hit hard. Then January hit harder. Temperatures plunged to minus 35 degrees Fahrenheit. Pipes burst across town. Furnaces failed. The power grid flickered like a dying candle. One by one, families left. Those who stayed huddled in blankets, burning through savings to keep heaters running. The street grew quiet, buried in snow and silence. Elias, however, did not leave. Smoke didn't rise from his chimney. His house looked abandoned. People assumed the worst. During the coldest night of the winter, the wind screamed like it was alive. A neighbor finally called emergency services, convinced Elias had frozen to death. When responders arrived, they found the house dark and unheated. But behind it, beneath the snow, warm air flowed out of a narrow, reinforced entrance. The tunnel was alive. They followed it underground, and what they found rewrote everything they thought they knew. Elias was there, calm, warm, alive. The tunnel opened into a compact underground home, insulated by earth and stone. The temperature inside hovered just above 50 degrees Fahrenheit, without a furnace, without electricity. Layers of careful engineering surrounded him. Passive airflow, thermal mass, recycled materials. What looked insane from above ground was brilliance below it. By morning, word spread fast. The man everyone mocked had built the only home on the street that winter could not touch. News crews arrived within days, their cameras fogging in the cold air as they ducked into the tunnel. Experts explained what Elias had quietly understood for years. The Earth itself is insulation. Just a few feet below the surface, temperatures stabilize, unaffected by brutal wind chills or sudden freezes. Elias had gone deeper than most dared. He let the ground do the work that furnaces struggled to achieve. What looked primitive was, in fact, deeply scientific. Elias didn't build the tunnel on a whim. Years earlier, he had worked in remote regions where power failures were common and winters unforgiving. He watched people lose homes, money, and sometimes their lives to the cold. When he finally settled in this town, he promised himself he would never be at the mercy of winter again. The tunnel was not madness. It was preparation. The joke stopped. Neighbors who once crossed the street to avoid him now knocked on his door. They asked questions. They brought notebooks. Some even apologized. Elias didn't say, "I told you so." He showed them airflow vents, thick walls, and simple design choices anyone could understand. What frightened people before now inspired them. In February, the grid collapsed completely. Homes above ground went dark and cold within hours. Families scrambled for generators and fuel that no longer existed. But underground, Elias brewed hot tea. His tunnel home stayed steady, silent, and warm. That night, a few neighbors slept underground with him. Realizing survival sometimes meant rethinking everything you believed about shelter. By spring, the tunnel was no longer a secret. Workshops were organized. Plans were shared. The town began talking about resilience instead of escape. Elias never wanted fame. He wanted proof that extreme winters didn't have to win. And as the snow melted, one truth remained clear. The line between insane and genius is often just one winter long. People assumed the tunnel home must have been expensive. Elias corrected them. The real cost wasn't money. It was time and isolation. He dug after work, on weekends in silence. He reused discarded materials, learned from old manuals, and made mistakes that forced him to start over more than once. While others spent winters indoors watching television, Elias spent his preparing for the next one. Not everyone was convinced. Some neighbors refused to step inside the tunnel, uneasy with the idea of living beneath the surface. They spoke about claustrophobia, collapse, and darkness. Elias listened carefully. Then he showed them reinforced supports, multiple exits, natural lighting shafts, and clear safety measures. The tunnel wasn't a bunker of fear. It was a space designed for calm. Emails and phone calls arrived from far beyond the street. People from colder regions wanted to know if this could work for them. Engineers asked questions. Survivalists praised the idea. City officials quietly requested copies of the plans. What began as one man's quiet project was now part of a larger conversation about housing, climate extremes, and self-reliance. Elias never claimed underground living was for everyone, but he challenged one powerful assumption, that a home must always fight nature instead of working with it. His tunnel didn't battle the cold. It stepped out of its reach. It didn't depend on fragile systems. It relied on physics that had existed long before power lines. When the next winter came, it was still brutal, but it was different. Some neighbors had added earth insulation. Others reinforced basements. A few even started digging. People no longer laughed when they saw a shovel in frozen ground. They remembered the winter that nearly broke them and the tunnel that didn't. Elias kept living quietly underground, knowing that sometimes the safest place forward is straight down. Living underground changed Elias in subtle ways. Days felt quieter. The constant hum of wind, engines, and distant traffic disappeared. Inside the tunnel home, sound was softened, slowed. Without drastic temperature swings, his body rested differently. Sleep came easier. Mornings felt steady instead of harsh. The tunnel didn't just protect him from winter, it reshaped his sense of time. Despite growing interest, rumors never fully disappeared. Some claimed Elias was preparing for the end of the world. Others insisted no normal person would choose Earth over sunlight. Elias accepted that misunderstanding was part of doing something new. Radical ideas rarely look reasonable at first glance. From the surface, the tunnel still looked strange. Only those who entered truly understood it. The real surprise came in July. While above-ground homes baked under relentless heat, Elias's tunnel remained cool and dry. No air conditioning, no fans, just stable earth doing what it always had. People realized the tunnel wasn't only a winter solution, it was a year-round one. Protection from extremes worked in both directions. Elias never lectured. When people asked, he answered. When they doubted, he invited them inside. He believed experience was more convincing than arguments. Slowly, attitudes shifted. The tunnel became less of a curiosity and more of a case study. Schools requested talks. Builders listened more closely. Quiet knowledge traveled far. Elias didn't know if his tunnel would still exist in 50 years. But he knew something else would, the idea that shelter could be smarter, simpler, and more resilient. Long after the headlines faded, long after the snow melted, a lesson remained buried beneath the street. Sometimes survival doesn't mean standing taller. Sometimes it means going deeper. Eventually, the city could no longer ignore what sat beneath Elias's backyard. Inspectors arrived with clipboards and cautious expressions. They expected violations, unsafe structures, shortcuts. Instead, they found careful planning, reinforced supports, and thoughtful design. What unsettled them most was not what Elias had done, but that existing building codes had never imagined someone doing it so well. Meetings followed, long ones. Officials debated how to classify a home that didn't rely on furnaces, didn't fear blackouts, and didn't fit neatly into residential definitions. Elias listened quietly. He wasn't trying to challenge the system. He was simply living outside its assumptions. The tunnel forced an uncomfortable question. Were the rules protecting people or limiting better solutions? As interest grew, imitations appeared. Some people rushed underground projects without patience or understanding. A few failed. One collapsed early and reinforced Elias's warnings. Digging wasn't the point, thinking was. He stressed preparation, study, and respect for the earth. The tunnel worked because it was built slowly, not because it was underground. One evening, an old friend visited Elias. They had known each other before the tunnel, before the winters worsened. Standing underground, the friend admitted something quietly. "I thought you were running away." Elias smiled. "I was staying," he said, "just differently." The tunnel wasn't an escape from life. It was a way to remain present when others couldn't. Years passed. Winters came and went. Some were mild. Others returned with the same brutal cold that once emptied the street. Through all of them, the tunnel endured. No headlines, no crews, just steady warmth beneath frozen ground. And that quiet consistency became the strongest proof of all. Climate patterns shifted, slowly at first, then all at once. Winters stretched longer. Storms arrived earlier. Infrastructure designed for milder decades struggled to keep up. What once seemed extreme now felt necessary. Underground living was no longer a curiosity. It was a conversation about adaptation. A small community began to form. Not hidden, not secretive, but intentional. Homes connected through insulated corridors. Shared spaces carved carefully into stable ground. Elias didn't lead it. He simply advised. The idea belonged to everyone now. What started as a single tunnel became a network of resilience. Children growing up underground experienced winter differently. Snowstorms became something to watch, not survive. Power outages were inconveniences, not emergencies. They learned early that shelter could be designed with nature instead of against it. For them, Elias's tunnel wasn't strange, it was normal. As interest peaked, Elias stepped back. Others spoke at conferences. Others wrote books. He stayed where he always felt most comfortable, below the surface, in quiet stability. He had never wanted to be remembered as a pioneer. He wanted people to stop freezing in homes that failed them. One night, during another record-breaking cold snap, Elias sat underground, listening to nothing at all. No alarms, no cracking pipes, no rushing wind. He realized success wasn't measured in attention or praise, but in how uneventful survival felt. The tunnel had done exactly what it was meant to do. Almost every visitor asked the same thing in the end. Would you ever go back? Elias never answered immediately. He let them feel the air, notice the silence, sense the steady warmth. Then he said no, not because the surface was wrong, but because once you experience stability, chaos feels unnecessary. Above ground, seasons dictated life. Schedules bent to weather forecasts. Repairs followed storms. Below ground, life continued unchanged. Meals tasted the same. Sleep followed the same rhythm. The tunnel didn't isolate Elias from the world. It freed him from reacting to it. For the first time, weather became background noise instead of a threat. Many thought living underground meant giving something up. Elias believed it gave something back. Freedom from bills tied to heat. Freedom from constant maintenance. Freedom from fear when temperatures dropped without warning. True freedom, he realized, wasn't endless space or open skies. It was knowing your shelter wouldn't fail you. Years after the first tunnel was dug, the street above had changed. Some houses were gone. Others were rebuilt differently. Entrances appeared where lawns once were. The same neighbors who once laughed now nodded with quiet respect. The tunnel had outlasted opinions and winters. If there was a lesson Elias hoped people would take, it wasn't about digging tunnels. It was about questioning defaults, about asking why things were built the way they were, and whether they still made sense. Sometimes progress doesn't rise higher. Sometimes it goes unnoticed, buried under snow and soil, quietly keeping someone alive. Time eventually caught up with Elias. His hands weren't as strong, and his pace was slower. But the tunnel didn't demand constant effort. It rewarded the work he had already done. While others worried about heating costs and retirement, Elias worried about nothing more than routine maintenance and quiet mornings. Younger builders came to learn. Elias no longer dug beside them, but he watched, corrected, and explained. He spoke less about technique and more about patience. Don't rush the earth, he would say. It's been here longer than you. The tunnel became a classroom without walls. One particularly long winter, Elias spent most days sitting still. He listened to the faint sounds of life above him. Footsteps, distant cars, snow sliding off roofs. He realized the tunnel hadn't separated him from the world. It had softened it, filtered its harshest edges, and let him remain part of it without constant strain. Elias began preparing for a future without himself in it. He documented the tunnel carefully. Materials, depths, airflow paths. Not for recognition, but for continuity. He wanted the knowledge to outlive him, just as the tunnel might. When Elias was gone, winter still came. But the tunnel remained, steady, quiet, and warm. Others lived there, learned from it, and adapted it to new needs. What neighbors once called insane had become inheritance. And beneath frozen ground, one simple idea endured. Survival doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it feels like peace. Long after the story disappeared from news feeds, the tunnel stayed busy. No cameras, no interviews, just people living, learning, and quietly benefiting from a decision made years earlier. The absence of attention was proof enough that the tunnel had moved from novelty to normal. Those who lived there spoke of Elias often, but never as a legend. They remembered small things, how he measured twice, how he paused to listen to the ground, how he trusted simple principles over complicated promises. The tunnel held those memories the way it held heat, slowly, evenly, without loss. New visitors still arrived, especially after extreme winters elsewhere. They came skeptical, cautious, curious, and almost all of them left thoughtful. Understanding didn't come from explanations. It came from standing underground, feeling warmth while snowstorms raged above, and realizing the solution had been there all along. Progress was once measured in height, taller buildings, higher towers, bigger skylines. The tunnel suggested another metric: durability, consistency, survival without strain. It asked a quiet but radical question. What if the future wasn't above us, but around us, supporting us silently? Seasons continued their cycle. Winters still tested the surface world. Below it, the earth remembered what it always had: how to stay steady when everything else changed. And the tunnel, carved with patience and belief, remained a reminder that sometimes the smartest path forward is the one that feels most ancient. Years later, architects and planners began proposing ideas that sounded familiar. Earth-sheltered homes, passive temperature control, designs that assumed power would fail, not hold. To many, these ideas felt new. To the tunnel's residents, they felt overdue. Elias had simply been early. Extreme cold no longer made headlines the way it once did. People adapted, or they didn't. Those who did looked for solutions that didn't depend on endless energy or constant repair. The tunnel had proven something crucial. Resilience wasn't dramatic. It was repeatable. Some who left the town years ago came back. They walked the same street, now subtly changed, and noticed what had once been mocked now quietly integrated. For them, the tunnel wasn't just a structure. It was a marker of survival, of a place that refused to disappear when conditions turned harsh. Trends came and went. Technologies promised miracles and vanished. But the principle beneath the tunnel remained unchanged. Work with the environment, not against it. As long as winters existed, that idea stayed relevant. People stopped saying the tunnel was insane. They stopped calling it brave, too. Instead, they called it obvious in hindsight. And buried beneath frozen ground, the tunnel stood as quiet proof that sometimes the smartest answers are the ones we ignore until we have no other choice. What began as a response to cold slowly became a philosophy of living. Designers stopped asking how houses should look and started asking how they should endure. The tunnel was no longer referenced as a shelter, but as a system, one that assumed stress, failure, and extremes as normal parts of life. Younger residents heard the old stories and found them strange. They couldn't imagine mocking someone for preparing thoughtfully. To them, digging into the earth wasn't extreme, it was practical. They grew up knowing warmth could be passive, quiet, and reliable. Fear of winter felt like an outdated idea. As the world grew louder and more unstable, people noticed something else the tunnel offered. Silence. No constant machinery. No emergency alerts. Just a calm hum of existence protected by layers of earth. In a time of constant noise, that quiet became priceless. Not everyone moved underground. Many chose not to, and that was fine. The tunnel was never meant to replace all homes. It existed to prove another option was possible. Choice, Elias believed, was the real victory. People could stay, adapt, and remain rooted instead of fleeing every extreme season. Decades passed. Technologies evolved. Cities changed shape. But beneath the ground, the tunnel remained steady. Its lesson didn't age. Nature doesn't need to be defeated, only understood. And what was once called insane quietly became wisdom, preserved in earth and time. People no longer waited for disaster to rethink their homes. The tunnel had shown that preparation didn't have to be reactive. It could be calm, intentional, and built over time. Resilience stopped being an emergency response and became part of everyday planning. Early critics once spoke of darkness and confinement. But those who lived underground learned how light could be guided, reflected, and softened. How space could feel open without being exposed. Fear faded as familiarity grew. The underground became simply another way to live. No one claimed the tunnel as intellectual property. Plans were copied, adapted, and improved freely. Each version looked slightly different, shaped by local soil and local needs. The idea survived precisely because it was never owned. It belonged to anyone willing to learn. Wealth used to mean size, visibility, and excess. The tunnel offered a quieter definition: low costs, few failures, and peace of mind during extremes. People began to value homes that demanded less and delivered more. Even as climates shifted and seasons grew unpredictable, one constant remained. Below the surface, warmth endured. Not forced, not fueled, just held by earth, by patience, and by a choice made long ago. The tunnel never asked for attention. It simply worked. Long after the original street faded from memory, the concept kept moving. Cold regions across the world adapted it, each culture reshaping the idea to fit its land. The tunnel was no longer a place. It was a principle that crossed borders without needing permission. Builders learned that the earth itself was a teacher. Different soils demanded different approaches. Clay held warmth. Rock required patience. Sand demanded restraint. The tunnel taught humility. Success came not from forcing designs, but from listening closely to the ground. The greatest compliment residents gave was simple. They stopped noticing the temperature. When comfort fades into the background, life takes center stage. The tunnel succeeded because it removed itself from daily concern. Despite all the proof, many places resisted change. Old habits clung tightly. Short-term fixes felt easier than long-term thinking. But each extreme winter nudged the conversation forward, reminding people that ignoring simple solutions carried cost. There was no final chapter for the tunnel. No grand ending. No collapse. No dramatic transformation. It continued doing what it had always done, holding warmth, offering shelter, and proving that wisdom doesn't need volume to endure. Over time, Elias's name mattered less than the result. People stopped asking who built the first tunnel and started asking how to build their own. The idea no longer depended on a single person. It stood on physics, patience, and proof. One winter arrived harsher than all the others combined. Power grids failed across entire regions. Supply chains froze. Emergency shelters overflowed. Underground, life continued quietly. No panic, no countdowns, just steady warmth held in silence. The tunnel never promised comfort out of generosity. It offered stability in exchange for respect. Careful planning, slow construction, thoughtful limits. Those who understood this didn't just survive winters, they stopped fearing them. The solution had never been futuristic. It didn't require advanced technology or endless energy. It required humility, the willingness to admit that the ground beneath our feet already knew how to protect us. Snow continued to fall. Temperatures continued to drop, and beneath it all, the tunnel remained. Not as a monument, not as a rebellion, but as a quiet reminder that sometimes the smartest way forward is not louder, higher, or faster, but deeper.